Good evening, everybody. We're doing Tech Talk Tuesday over at the Bryce Homestead, and I want to know if anybody can hear me. Let's get some folks on here and see if you hear me. I know we got 4 or 5 minutes left before we start, and it ain't going to be about the manger scene or these little figurines. Hey, but that's where we're starting right here. And Jackie suggested, since I was doing it at home tonight, that this would be pretty cool to show, because my mama made these little figurines. She hand painted them all and collected them over the years back in the 50s. I was born in 54, and my daddy and there's Mike Bryce. He knows these figurines very well. These were made by my mother, and she, like I said, she hand painted these. And don't run off, because we're not going to talk about these 3 wise men or any of that, or the Virgin Mary. But these are cool. We put them out at Christmas, and Jackie put that stuff out. And when I got to this little table, this table in the living room, or the den, I guess this is, I was going to use this table to put some dyno sheets and talk about dyno tuning and the correction factor differences, and these little figurines are worth talking about. One is, I'm real proud that my mother was able to do this and collect these little pieces, and she put together a really nice manger scene over the years. And like I said, Tech Talk Tuesday isn't about this, but I thought I'd do a little quick intro on the reason for the season. Everybody has their own beliefs and their own stuff, and we don't really get into that. Not at Star Power, but it is the reason for the season. The reason we have Christmas is because Jesus was born tomorrow, and Jackie's mother was born tomorrow. So we have 2 birthdays to do tomorrow, and but as we get close to our Tech Talk Tuesday, I will turn to the subject at hand, which will be correction factors and dyno tuning. Anybody can hear me? I'm going to talk a little bit. I hope you guys can hear me, and I see that there's more people signing up. We are going to talk about dynos. Okay, so if you guys are cruising around and looking to see what's coming up, we're going to talk about dyno tuning. We're going to talk about horsepower, and we're going to talk about torque, and we're going to talk about SAE and STD. I see we got a pretty skinny crowd on here tonight. I guess it's because people are doing their last minute shopping or or something, but anyway, I just wanted to take a moment and see if we can gather up a crowd here. Correction factors has been a good subject for the dyno testing. I have some prepared information, and I want to tell you, I see people when I do a dyno post, or when anybody does a dyno post, the people that are questioning the validity, or they want to know something to compare to something they read, or who knows what they're after, but they'll say almost every time, is that STD or SAE? And then somebody that doesn't know will say, well, if it's SAE, it will show a lot less power. And if it's STD, then they say, well, that's not real, because that shows different power than SAE. Well, most people want their engine dyno to show what they have compared to a buddy, or what they have compared to what they had, and they want to see what a change does with some realistic results. So in hot rod motorcycle racing and engines, for our whole career, we've been working on horsepower and the dyno results. And the flow bench is a tool, the bathroom scales are a tool, the dyno is a tool, and at Star Racing, Star Power, we have several we have 2 engine dynos, and we also have I'll give you something to look at while I'm talking. We have 2 engine dynos. We have a Superflow that's 1,000 horsepower that we used all the years to develop the 4-cylinders. And we have a really nice DTS dyno that Superflow bought that company, and we use it for, it's a 2,000 horsepower dyno, and a lot of NASCAR teams and engine development teams use that type of dyno. And then, of course, the standard of the industry in the hot rod Harley industry is the DynoJet dynamometer for the rear wheel power. And a couple things I wanted to talk about real quick is I'm going to talk about the differences between SAE and STD. And if you can hear me okay, I'm going to go over some stuff that I grabbed out of a magazine that I had, and we're going to talk deeper into the complicated world of correction factors. This is a series of equations that dynamometers can apply to obtain a standardized horsepower and torque measurement. And the only reason that's really good is so that I'll read this to you. Although that let's see. Correction factors aren't a scam, and they aren't invented so dyno operators can trick customers into thinking they picked up power when they didn't. Although that certainly doesn't mean that doesn't happen, because people out there do find ways to show elevated and inflated power output. But listen to me, y'all. When the guy gets on his motorcycle, when the customer gets on his motorcycle, when you're finished, and he goes down the road and he comes back, and all he can say is, OMG, this thing rips. I'm going to tell you something. It doesn't matter what the flow bench said. It doesn't matter what the scale said. It doesn't matter what the dyno said. I call it the face cam. When they drive back and all you can see is teeth, they're not disappointed. I'm telling you, they're happy. And then when you go to the drag strip and you go new top speed and new ET records, and the thing wants to turn over backwards at half track or in first and second gear, people are like, wow, I don't know what my dyno says. Or they don't even, all of a sudden the dyno numbers don't matter. But if you do mail order stuff and you ship parts out, the dyno is very, very important, the results of the dyno. So why do correction factors exist? Well, the short answer is that engines produce different power depending on the atmospheric conditions in where they are tested. The long answer is that people from all over the world enjoy and can learn from comparing dyno results, and there would be no way to do that without good correction factors and numbers to work off of standard correction. So this particular example that was used in the magazine was a Camaro that had about 400 horsepower at the rear tires. And the reason I picked it out, it doesn't have anything to do with the Harley stuff, but this is a great example of how correction factors work. And I hope you guys can hear me. Okay, this Camaro, they strapped it down to the DynoJet and brought the engine up to operating temperature, and they got 180 degrees in the water temperature and 170 degrees in the oil, and they hit the record button, and this was with at 81 degree air temperature in the dyno cell, and it was 2953 barometer and 33% humidity, and it made 399 horsepower and 383 foot-pounds of torque. Now, you don't have to remember this, but I'll help you understand what I'm saying. Okay. Those are uncorrected numbers that represent exactly what that Camaro has to the wheels on that day during that test without any arithmetic besides typical horsepower and torque calculations that are explained. Okay, here's the STD correction, or standard correction. STD stands for standard correction. It represents one of the oldest correction factors used by the Society of Automotive Engineers, which is SAE. SAE used the STD known as J607, and it used the standard correct conditions of 60 degree air, 2992 barometer, and 0 humidity. For you engine dyno enthusiasts, that should look familiar because the STD J607 is one of the most popular correction factors available and is used almost exclusively by NASCAR teams to compare results from chassis dyno to results from the engine dyno. And we all know, and we've all read, and we've all heard that if you dyno your engine on an engine dyno, it makes more power than it does at the rear wheels because you lose power through the drivetrain. That is a known fact. That is something we can count on, and it happens. So that's one reason and people say, well, that's 12 to 17%. Depends on if it's an automatic transmission, a torque converter, a clutch, or whatever. So it's really kind of a, it's not necessarily easy to figure that. But if you're going to do a rear wheel dyno, you want to have very consistent testing procedure so you can get consistent results. That's the only thing that really matters. Okay, applying the correction factor to this Camaro, which it made 399, and now with the correction factor, it made 410 horsepower and 395 foot-pounds of torque. That means it picked up 11 horsepower and 11 foot-pounds of torque, which is about 2.9 or 2.8%. So why? Well, remember, the uncorrected results were in a room that was 21 degrees warmer than the standard correction, the standard of the standard correction, which is 60 degrees. So 81 degrees versus 60 degrees with a slight loss in the atmospheric pressure, which is the barometer, from 2992 down to 2953. And instead of zero humidity, it's got 33%. So there is those changes, just the temperature, just a little bit less barometer, and a little bit more humidity made 2% difference between uncorrected and corrected. Now listen to me, y'all. If it's a hot day, you're not going to make much uncorrected horsepower. If it's a cold day, you're going to make a lot of corrected horsepower because colder air packs more oxygen molecules and hot air packs less oxygen molecules. And in order to burn more fuel, we have to have more oxygen. That's just how it works. And if you don't have oxygen, you can't make power. If you don't have fuel, you can't make power. So, for instance, if we took our 100 horsepower Harley Davidson and dynoed it in Americus, Georgia, and it made 100 horse, and then we drove to Denver, Colorado, and put it on the dyno there, it would still make 100 horsepower corrected because the correction factors fix the differences in the atmospheric conditions. Well, if you look at uncorrected on the Harley in Denver, it's only going to make 80 horsepower versus, say, 100 in Americus, and that's because there's less oxygen. That's the bottom line. And if you do manual fuel injection like I've done for years in racing pro stock, is when we run 100% fuel at sea level and then we go to Denver to race, we have to pull out 20% of the fuel just to make the correct air-fuel ratio and make the most power we can. Good afternoon. I see several people clicking in and saying hi. So I just wanted to talk about that a minute. Now, let's go to the SAE correction. Okay, this is the SAE J1349. It's the current standard of dyno testing and represents the newest widely accepted industry standard for correction factors. It was re-engineered in 1990. That's a long time ago. The SAE correction factor standardizes the temperature from 60 degrees to 77 degrees and the barometer from 2992 to 2923 and dry 0% humid air. The SAE correction when testing parts is good if you're going to always use SAE. If you're going to use STD, it's good as long as you're going to use STD. When you start comparing SAE corrected numbers to STD numbers, that's when we get into this little quandary that everybody talks about on the internet. It gets a little, if you know what's going on and you're savvy of all this, it's actually a little bit painful to watch because people say, yeah, but was that STD or was that SAE? Well, it's not that much power, which I'm going to show you in a minute, difference. As long as you check SAE before you ran it and SAE after you ran it with changes, and then you go to standard correction before you make changes, and then you make the changes and then go standard correction after the change, you'll see the same amount of gain. And I've got examples to show that. Okay. Another thing SAE does, which is a little bit goofy to me, is unlike STD, also uses a mechanical efficiency friction modifier in the correction factor, which assumes an 85% mechanical efficiency or a 15% differential in power due to frictional losses, which is fairly accurate for a standard all-motor application. Now, if you're thinking that means they're just going to read 15% higher power, that's not the case. In fact, SAE, due to the higher standard temperature and absolute pressure, which is barometer, will normally read about 2% lower than a dyno graph printed in STD. It's important to note There are lots of other correction factors out there, but the two standard ones that we use, and I use loosely, the standard ones that we use in the world. Yeah, thank you, Graham. PSN, DIN. I got a whole list of the ones. You can use a lot of different ones, especially if you're from France or Italy or Finland. They got all kind of stuff. But in America, the two most popular ones that are printed and used and broadcast are the SAE and the STD. And I don't care which one you use as long as you use the same apples and apples and the same oranges and oranges to show comparisons. Thank you, Hammerville. Hey, Donnie. All right. Last thing about that. There's not much. Okay. When we did the same Camaro with the SAE corrections, it made, let's see what it made. It made 401 and 386. So the difference between the SAE and the STD on the same day it wasn't, let's see, correction factor by 1% showing SAE system puts much more emphasis on pressure and difference. Okay, they didn't see the big change that we're looking for. It was actually right at about 2% difference between them. All right, understanding correction factors and the math involved can be fun mental exercise, but the real point here is to understand how dyno graphs can be compared and what to do if you're comparing two graphs from similar cars tested in different environments or similar motorcycles tested in different environments. First and foremost, you need access to the correction factor, y'all. The correction factor. It's got to be printed and shown to you. If you see a dyno sheet, they wrote something about that right here. If you don't see the correction factor numbers like SAE smoothing 5 or STD smoothing 4 or 5, and you don't see those numbers on a graph and you find on the internet, start getting suspicious. You may be looking at an altered graph or at the very least something run with a strange correction factor. Make sure the numbers are there. SAE and standard are very close and should be compared in the factor either SAE or STD. But SAE versus SAE for a test, and STD versus STD. All right. Just like bathroom scales, y'all, they're close, man. You go to the one at your house and it says you weigh whatever you weigh, and then you go to the doctor and it has a little different number. Then you might even have some scales over to your buddy's house or some at your shop, and you measure. Every one of them measures a little bit different. But there are acceptable differences that we get along with. My own self, all three of our dynos, they repeat within 1%, plus or minus. I mean, there are dynos you can buy now, and there's some real high dollar testing equipment that are even closer than that, especially if you're religious about oil temperature, water temperature, air temperature, and making sure that everything is the same every time. If you have variables that you don't measure, then you're going to have results that you can't understand. Say that again. If you have variables you don't measure, you will have results you don't understand. If you're really consistent with lots and lots of variables. I had a friend of mine come over when we first put our DTS in, when we bought it for our NHRA Pro Stock program for the SNSV twins, and he's a NASCAR guy, and he helped me. He said, look, you got to have this, 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 because you're going to be lost. You're going to make changes, and you're going to want to see little incremental changes to the things you do, like timing and jetting and air fuel ratios and maybe rocker arm ratios and maybe cam timing. And there was a lot of things we tested, and you want to see whether you're going the right direction or not. And if you miss 1 or 2 horsepower on a 400 horsepower engine, that's within the realm of the 1% repeatability, but it would be nice to know if you're on the high side or the low side so you can make a better change on your next test. And I know I'm blowing a lot of smoke here, sounds like, but here's some things that I find very important for you to do on your Harley testing, car testing, or whatever you're testing is oil temperature, tire pressure, the correction factor, and the engine temperature. I jotted those notes down because they're important to me. I'll tell you what, I rode a Harley a minute ago. I got home a little bit late, and I was riding a Road King, and it sure felt like it was pretty weak. I mean, if it had 70 horsepower, I'd throw it as far as I could, but checked the air in the tire, and of course it was handling really bad, and I just nursed it onto the house, but it was down 20 PSI on the rear tire, and that's over 10 horsepower. That might even be 20 horsepower. So you can we at Star Racing, we put 40 pounds of air in the back tire, and we warm it up and get the engine all the way warmed up, and we go for operating temperatures to try and get some consistent results. If you want to inflate the numbers on the dyno to fool somebody, it's possible, but I don't really see it. And if somebody posts it out there, I don't think they realize that people can catch them that know what they're looking for. All right, I did some dyno sheets here for help us understand. I don't know if you can see this, so I'm going to do the best I can trying to get it up there, maybe close enough to see. All right, this is a stock 103 with some slip-ons. Let me try and get. Ooh, it's hard to focus on that. Anyway, it says 78.4 horsepower and 101.9 foot-pounds of torque, okay? This is an STD with 40 pounds of air in the tire and a warm engine with the oil up to temperature. This is the exact same test, WP8, same test. I just switched it from STD to SAE, and it made 76.5 horsepower and 99.5. No change. It's 1.87 horsepower less. So when you get your bike dynoed and somebody says, yeah, but was that SAE or was that STD? Listen, y'all, on this Harley, it was 1.8 horsepower difference. And I got something else to show you. This is really cool. So here's a Thrasher 107 kit. STD, 128 horsepower, 128.65, and 126.7 foot-pounds of torque, SAE, all right? Same test. Same test number. We made 126 and 124.3, and that's a 2.4 horsepower difference from STD to SAE. And I'm going to get to the point of all this in a minute. But just so you would know, it's not some 10 or 20 horsepower thing that people lead you to believe. All right, here's a 124 crate engine. Before and after, this is really cool, y'all. This is standard correction. It made 95.3. This is a very well-tuned 103. Had pipes and a tuner, and it ran great. It made 95 horsepower. That's a lot for a 103. It had 109 foot-pounds of torque. This was a well-tuned bike. Then we took that out and put this crate motor, 124 S&S crate motor in. It made 137.1, and it made 143.2. That is nothing but an engine change. Same pipe, same throttle body, same air cleaner, just an engine swap. So we picked up, how much horsepower is that, y'all? 5 on top of that. So it's 40 horsepower. 40 horsepower. All right, STD. Same test, same part number test, 20 and 2. There's 20 and 2. SAE went from 137 to 135. It went from 95 as it before to 93 before. Same 124 crate engine. The difference between SAE and STD was 1.9 horsepower. But this is the thing that's really, really important. The amount of increase from the stock engine to the 124 engine is exactly the same, y'all. It's not 1 horsepower difference. It's the same. You pick up whatever you pick up with. What is the math on that? Somebody does math better than me. Subtract that from it and see what the gain is. 35 and 7. What's 35 and 7? Well, that's almost 94, so it'll be 35 and 6. So that's 41 horsepower. $35 on top of that and 7, yep. Same amount of increase. SAE and STD was 1.9 horsepower difference on a crate. And now I got, this is the deal to me right here. This is Bagzilla. Get it where you can see it. Bagzilla. So 135 cubic inch engine is highly modified, and we turn it almost 8,000 RPM, 7,500. I shift it past that. And this bike runs 9.3s, 146, 147 miles an hour. It only has 197 horsepower. And the people that have bikes that run almost as good as Bagzilla tell me they got 215, 220, 210. I don't know what dyno that was, and it don't matter because I outrun them. And I'm not being silly. I'm not being cocky. I'm telling the truth. They go 142. They go 143. This bike goes 146. This horsepower right here, 197 and 164 foot-pounds of torque. This equals 146 mile an hour on a full-size Road King with this old man on it, suited at 200 pounds. And it doesn't really matter what correction factor here is, because this is just a comparison. Now, here's the same dyno, STD. Here's the same dyno sheet at SAE. It says it made 193 and 161 foot-pounds. Okay, that's 3.8 horsepower less. But guess what? It went 146.9 miles an hour with SAE 193 and STD 197. So this is what matters. And I'm not selling horsepower numbers, I'm selling performance. I'll leave that there for us to talk about. But remember, the guy that's excited after he rides a bike, that's the results that matter. This thing flows a lot of air. Flows 350 to 400 CFM depending on the lift and the depression you check it at. It makes between 190 and 200 horsepower. But I'm going to tell you something, man. It'd go out there and top a second gear and turn over backwards. It'd go 120 in the eighth mile. It'd go 146 in the quarter mile. And it makes my pulse rate go up, makes my hands shake, and it happens every time I ride it. Because it's got a lot of power. And I understand that you guys, it's really important. The SAE stuff and the STD is for comparison purposes. So if you bring your motorcycle to me and you have a dyno sheet in your possession that says it made 100 horsepower SAE, then we'll put it on my dyno and we'll run it and see if it'll make 100 horsepower SAE on my dyno. But I'm going to say that there are some people watching, and we have some competitors that are really, really awesome, that do a great job. And you have to be a little bit, it's like you should be unemotional about the results instead of emotional about the results. And if you're trying to show somebody more power than they have, then I think you should go back to work and make some more power. That's just my opinion. I see it's not that many people on here watching right now, and I know it's either the content or the day is messing up a little bit. But I'm not going to hold you up because, hey, look, it's Christmas Eve. I want everybody to remember the reason for the season. And the last thing before I get to run some folks off here is I want to share this with you one more time. We're at the Bryce house. We're over here where me and Jackie make house payments. And this is a nativity scene that my mother worked on in the 1950s. And she collected these little figurines. And she did a really great job hand painting them. It's Joseph, hand painted. It looks really neat. And the little baby Jesus in the manger, and the three wise men, and the shepherd, and I even see some frankincense and myrrh, or whatever that is. I've read about it, but I don't know that much about it, and a few animals and stuff. But remember the reason for the season. Merry Christmas to everybody. Thank you guys so much for following and caring. And hey, look, there's Boots right there. Boots. Say hi, Boots. Boo-boo. Say hi. Say hi to everybody. Okay. He's looking for supper. Anyway, again, I'm very thankful for y'all. And enjoy Christmas. Remember the reason for the season. And I look forward to seeing you guys again next Tuesday. And if you enjoyed this or you want to know more, please send me messages. I feed on feedback, believe it or not. I think that's why they call it feedback. It's like giving back some information. But anyway, I feed on feedback, and if you'll give me some, I would really appreciate it. And we'll keep digging on this end, my friend. And thank you guys a bunch. May God bless y'all. Merry Christmas.